What is going on, Jet fans? Matt O'Leary back with another video. Today, our deep dive series continues as we take a look at some of the prospects the New York Jets just drafted. Today, we'll be talking Mason Taylor with Wilson Alexander. He covers LSU football for The Advocate and NOLA.com. Here's our conversation. All right, I'd like to welcome on Wilson Alexander, who covers LSU football for The Advocate and NOLA.com. Wilson, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Matt.
Absolutely. So the New York Jets took Mason Taylor out of LSU in the second round this year. So kind of just wanted to give my audience a better idea of the kind of player that they're getting here. Can you speak to the progression of his career at LSU and kind of just how he improved year over year?
Over the course of his career, Mason just became more of an all-around player. What was clear from the time he was a freshman is that he had some ability as a pass catcher from that tight end position. He was really fluid in his route running, ran well downfield, and was a part of LSU's offense from the time he was a freshman, obviously being a three-year starter. But as he got older, he just became more precise in his ability as a receiver, and there was a big jump between his sophomore and junior year in terms of particularly his role within the offense, but also as a result of that, his own progression, his productivity. He also improved, I would say, as a blocker. That is probably still not the strong suit of his game. It's not why he was on the field as early as he was at LSU necessarily, but it is something that has improved over the course of his career.
Now, what would you say are like some of his biggest strengths? I know you mentioned his pass catching ability early on in his career, but what about his game would you say is a reason why he was a top of the second round pick?
It's his fluidity as a route runner, his ability to make contested catches. There was some impressive stuff that he did, I think in particular last year at LSU, going down to get balls that were around his feet, going to get balls that were kind of over his head, things along the sideline. He was able to make a lot of tough catches, and he was just such a reliable target for Garrett Nussmeier that Nussmeier trusted him in a lot of critical situations. He was pretty good over the middle as well. Not afraid to take hits in that area of the field, and just a really solid short to intermediate target was probably the biggest strength of his game.
Now, something that I get asked a ton by Jet fans is, how is he as a blocker? And I know you mentioned like you wouldn't classify that as the strong suit of his game, but where would you say he is right now as a blocker heading into the NFL?
I don't know, for some reason a grade scale came to mind, and I'd give him maybe like a B on the college level. And maybe it's better than that, and we just couldn't quite tell. But LSU had him flexed out some, and so he's probably a pretty decent blocker in the NFL, like in space when he needs to be. But he's not a huge guy. So the inline blocking, which LSU required him to do at times, there were moments when it just wasn't fantastic. Like it was good enough most of the time, but it wasn't necessarily like going to be able to really like take over play. He was usually helping out with some combo blocks and stuff like that. I can't remember how much he was sort of having to block a defensive end by himself in the run game. It just isn't coming to mind. But yeah, if I had to give it a grade, like probably a B on the college level. But there was certainly room to continue to improve there as well.
Yeah, I mean, you just mentioned it there with him as an inline tight end and then him in the slot. And just looking at some of the numbers and the splits, it seems like it was fairly even from his amount of time played as an inline tight end and then lined up out as a slot. Did you notice one maybe better than the other as a fit for him?
No, I don't think so. I think he does both of them pretty well. That was one of the things that made him an effective tight end, is that he could do both. He wasn't sort of pigeonholed into one spot. That was one of the things that LSU liked about him a lot, is that they could be creative in terms of where they lined him up. And he didn't just have to, because they had tight ends on the roster over the past few years who were they were strictly blocking tight ends on the inline. And then they have a freshman this past year named Trey Green, who is more of a slot kind of receiver. And Mason was able to do both. And that was part of the reason that he was on the field a lot.
Now, something that's been talked a lot about with Mason Taylor is his dad being, playing in the NFL in Jason Taylor. Jason was a Jet for 1 year in 2010, which happens to be the last time the Jets made the playoffs. But wanted to get your perspective on how you think it impacts him making the jump from the college game to the NFL with having someone like Jason Taylor, or even technically his uncle too, Zach Thomas, playing in the league?
It can only help. It certainly helped when he was making the transition to LSU. Is it a result of his dad being Jason Taylor or something else? I don't know. But the fact is that Mason has a pretty good head on his shoulders. He's always been very composed, cool under pressure. I mean, gosh, as a freshman, he's making the game-winning catch in overtime to beat Alabama. And there's a mentality there that should translate well no matter what he does next, that I think probably comes in some part from his dad, and being around NFL players, kind of understanding what it takes to be able to succeed and to move on to the next play. I mean, gosh, I chuckled because it was so typically him on his first media appearance after getting drafted by the Jets, where he said, he brought up the 24-hour rule and how he's like, hey, it's going to be great, but then 24 hours got to move on. And that's a lot of cliche in there, but we've also heard that so much from Mason over the past few years that it did not come as a surprise that he would sort of be in that mentality that he can celebrate for a little bit and then now the work begins. And that's what you want to hear, I think, from a guy who's just been drafted, that he realizes this isn't the ultimate goal, but just the start of what he's coming next for him.
Now, you gave some great insight on that right there, but another question that I get often from Jets fans too is, like, what kind of character are we getting from this guy? So, in addition to the 24-hour rule and what you just went through, can you speak to the kind of person and player and preparation guy that Mason Taylor is?
Yeah, I mean, I think he checks the boxes on all of those fronts. Never heard a bad thing about him at LSU. Somebody who coaches always respected the work that he put in. He was pretty early on in his career sort of one of those team leaders. He's not a super vocal guy from as much as we can understand. He's not somebody who is has this really big personality or anything like that. But he just sort of puts his head down and goes to work. And those coaches really like that about him. I mean, he was putting in kind of a leadership position fairly early on. Last year, he was one of LSU's sort of team leaders, team captains. They have these things called SWAT teams where they have 10 players who then kind of draft everybody on the team, and it's also designed to keep everybody accountable, and Mason was one of those people. He was brought out a lot to represent the program. LSU doesn't really when they have media availabilities during the week, they sort of hand select who is going to be speaking, and Mason was put in that position a good bit because they trusted him to be able to do that.
That's great. And the last one that I have for you here is, we talked a lot about the positives in his game and why he was such a, highly touted prospect coming out of school. But if there was something that you could pinpoint as something that he would need to improve at heading into this next level in the NFL, what would you say is an area that he maybe needs to get a little better in?
It's the inline blocking, which you probably tell I was going to say. I mean, based on what we've already discussed so far, he's going to be going up against, guys who are so much bigger and faster than they were on the college level there off the edge position and those outside linebackers and such, that he's just going to have to get better in that regard, be able to, match up with them physically. His technique is going to have to continue to get better. All those things that go into being a capable inline blocker are really going to be what he has to focus on, because right away he can help as a receiver in that area of the field. But just to be able to hold his own and then maybe even take over at times as an inline blocker is what he's going to have to continue to get better at.
All right. Thank you so much, Wilson. I really feel like you gave some great insight here onto Mason Taylor joining the New York Jets.
Thank you for having me.